Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's RDBA webinar titled Meaningful Messages Encourage More Family Meals. I'm Stephanie Schultz. I'm a registered dietitian and the head of strategic partnerships here at the Association of Retail and Consumer Professionals. And today's webinar is sponsored by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and has been approved for 1 CPEU by CDR for dietetic professionals. I will go ahead after the webinar is over to email the certificate of attendance as well as a link to the slide deck and a recording of the presentation today. So with that, let's dive into the content. What began in 2015 as a campaign to shine the light on the benefits of family meals has really gained momentum year over year since. Health professionals, retailers, and manufacturers have embraced the concept, and FMI, the Food Industry Association, expanded Family Meals Month into the Family Meals Movement this year. To stay engaged and inspired in the kitchen, we know that consumers need meaningful messages, meal planning tips, and menu ideas that meet their needs for convenience, affordability, and health. And that's what we're here to learn about today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Riley, who's today's presenter. Riley Peterson is here on behalf of the Beef Checkoff, and she's a registered dietitian as well as the director of nutrition influencer programs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, again, who's sponsoring the webinar today. Riley is an expert in translating scientific research and the nutrition principles into compelling marketing stories, accessible education, and meaningful change for clients, patients, and consumers. She's also experienced on the social media marketing side of things, technical writing, and copywriting for health, wellness, food, and commodity brands. Today, Riley's going to share some compelling ways that we can communicate the importance of family meals and provide resources that will help you provide that year-round family meal inspiration for your customers. So welcome to the platform, Riley. And before I turn the floor completely over to you, just a note to participants, if you have questions, please put them into the questions and chat feature, and I will go ahead and come back on with about 7 to 10 minutes left at the end, and we will go through the Q&A session. So with that, the stage is yours, Riley.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here with you all today. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Riley Peterson. I'm a registered dietitian and the director of nutrition influencer programs with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm going to say NCBA from here on out because it's a little bit of a mouthful. Today, I'll be sharing some insights on meaningful message activations in celebration of the Family Meals Movement. So thank you again for having me. Really excited to be here with you all. A little bit of background on myself in just a moment, but before we get there, I'll go through our agenda today. I want to start by giving just overview introductions to myself and to my organization, as well as some background on the Family Meals Month and movement, wanting to set the stage a little bit as to why we're talking about this today and why it's important to extend this movement at specific moments in time throughout the year to really engage with shoppers. I'll also provide a snapshot of consumer trends so we can use data to really help drive the messaging that we are providing to shoppers and consumers. And then I'll turn over to and provide some really practical examples of how you can extend meaningful meal messages to shoppers to get them excited around this movement. And then I'll provide some resources and next steps that you can take, hoping that they're useful and that you can extend them in your own practice. Our learning objectives today, we are going to start by describing current and projected home meal trends for consumers. I'll then translate family meals movement and nutrition messaging into actionable change that consumers can make to improve their health and wellness. And then I'm going to identify balanced and convenient recipes that families can enjoy at home and help close nutrient gaps during childhood and adolescence. So quick background on myself, just to kind of help you get to know me a little bit better. As I mentioned, registered dietitian. I am in Denver, Colorado, and moved out here about 5 years ago to begin my career as a nutrition professional with Children's Hospital Colorado. So I started out in pediatric nutrition, working with patients and their families to ultimately help support their nutrition status as they were sick, ill, and recovering in the hospital. However, my career path took a bit of a turn during the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure you can all understand, times were a little strange. And ultimately, I found myself consulting with health and wellness related companies to support nutrition related marketing, communications, and content creation. I also worked in private practice and was specifically working with families and children to empower their sense of body positivity and ultimately help them make positive and healthy lifestyle changes to support the family and kind of overall well-being. So I found my way to National Cattlemen's Beef Association a little bit less than 2 years ago, where now I lead up the Nutrition Influencer Program, and I partner with healthcare professionals to educate about the role of beef in healthy lifestyle patterns. And just a quick background too on the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, in case you're not familiar. NCBA was founded, funded, and governed by beef farmers and ranchers, as well as U.S. beef importers here in the United States. And ultimately, we use our funding to research, innovate, and promote beef as part of healthy lifestyle patterns. I do work with a wonderful team at NCBA, and we lead multiple facets of nutrition education and programming across the organization, from nutrition research led by Dr. Claire Lau to health professional education led by Lillian Berman, and culinary nutrition led by Amy Cifelli. Our team is led by Dr. Shailene McNeil, and we work with two incredible consultants, Emma Mortensen and Brooke Levechka, to support our program. And ultimately, I think this is important just so you understand kind of where we're coming from and kind of how we root down. This is our statement of principles document, and I think this is a really cool document because it was actually created in conjunction with beef farmers and ranchers. Luckily, they care deeply about the health and wellness of Americans, and so they worked with us, and we were able to establish priorities relating back to nutrition and health, prioritizing it, and trying to do our best to communicate nutrition and health research to consumers and health professionals alike. So ultimately, the statement of principles, probably can't see it because it's pretty small, but ultimately what it says is we're providing factual and scientifically supported information to help consumers make informed choices about their health. And we work with to elevate government-supported entities such as the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, ultimately to drive education and well-being across the population. So with that being said, I want to actually dig into the reason why we're all here today, talking a little bit more about meaningful messages for Family Meals Month and the Family Meals Movement. So I'll set the stage. First, just want to talk about why we're talking about family meals in the first place. Unfortunately, we know that school-age children, including adolescents, are falling short on consuming essential nutrients to support things, learning, activity, growth, and development. In fact, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans highlighted how many children and adolescents are not getting enough high-quality protein, iron, zinc, choline, B6, B12, and really this is kind of the case across the lifespan. When we look at the Healthy Eating Index score, which is a measure of diet quality that can be used to assess how well Americans are following the current dietary guideline recommendations, we can see that kids and adults are really just not making the grade when it comes to diet quality. So if we're thinking about a scale of 1 to 100, if you look at they're failing grades. We want to be able to empower and educate the American consumer about ways that they can proactively take matters into their own hands regarding health as registered dietitians. That's our goal, to help improve diet quality across the lifespan and optimize nutrition and health. And I'm speaking specifically to children too, because this is a really important time. At a time where growth and development is taking place, nutrient needs are increasing, intake is not matching recommendations, and we're starting to see adolescents start to develop more independence. We're really laying the foundation for kids to be able to make informed and educated choices about their own health as they grow. And so this is a really important time to optimize nutrition in adolescent populations. And ultimately, we know across the lifespan, there's a lot of opportunity to make improvements to the American diet and help consumers make better choices about their nutrition. And when it comes to family meals, we know that there are numerous studies that are highlighting the benefits of eating together as a family. Family meals have been shown to impact the health of the family. It's been shown to impact kids' academic performance, as well as bolster emotional and mental health. Research is also proving that people who are eating more meals at home are eating fewer and more healthy calories. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an improving trend for those eating and consuming meals at home, which makes sense, right? That was our only option for a while. There were a couple of options to eat out, but ultimately people were stuck at home and they were cooking a lot more at home. And I think the really cool part about this is that despite the fact that we are returning to some sense of normalcy, now that the world's opening back up, we are still seeing that shoppers are maintaining these habits. So about 2/3 of shoppers were cooking and eating meals at home during the pandemic. And research is finding that 92% of those individuals who were eating more meals at home are really continuing this trend. So they're eating at home as often, if not more often than they were during the pandemic. And that means that shoppers are able to during that time, they were able to recognize the value that eating at home offers, whether it was economic advantage or more time spent together with the family, or maybe they just preferred the foods, they felt better about the foods they were eating when they were cooking at home. And ultimately, that momentum is something that we can capitalize on as registered dietitians, and we can ultimately drive people towards eating more meals at home and the benefits that are associated. So of course, we cannot talk about Family Meals Month without talking about FMI, the Food Marketing Institute. They have been really instrumental in driving this Family Meals Month campaign, as well as the Family Meals movement, recognizing that family meals are important year-round. And they've done a lot of great work too in tracking the impact of these campaigns. So research from the 2016 campaign showed that 85% of shoppers said they took action after seeing the Family Meals Month campaign. And furthermore, 95% of those who saw the campaign said that their consumption or shopping behaviors changed after seeing it. So something was resonating. And I think this tells us that shoppers are really seeing the value of this communication. They're spending more time, this is in 2016, but thinking, fast forward to 2020, they're eating more meals at home, they're recognizing the value. And we can really lean into this message and further move the needle on diet quality through our communication surrounding this campaign. And in conjunction with just the influence and the way that it resonates with shoppers, it's also really important to recognize how influential we are as dietitians when it comes to communicating this information. When it comes to receiving nutrition information and advice, we are recognizing that shoppers are really looking to dietitians. So some market research that came out of foodinsight.org found that when consumers were looking to get nutrition advice, thank goodness, they were looking to registered dietitians for that expertise. So followed by healthcare professionals and wellness counselors or coach, registered dietitians really are those leading experts that are driving consumer change and behavior relating back to making healthy choices and leading healthier lifestyles. So more folks are eating at home than ever. And when combined with messaging and education that relates back to the Family Meals Month and the Family Meals movement, there's a real opportunity to help point consumers in the right direction. I've linked a couple of resources, and I actually put together a single page with all the resources that I mentioned throughout this presentation that we'll follow up with after, so you can use these resources for yourself. So don't worry if you can't access the slides right now, we'll get those resources over to you. But I've linked a couple of them here that might be helpful. I'm sure you all have, but if you have not already, I really encourage you to go and explore the resources available on the Family Meals Movement website. It's a wealth of information and resources, and I found it really helpful when planning marketing activations surrounding this topic. Because there's no need to reinvent the wheel, right? So just feel free to peruse around. There's a lot of really great information and resources available. I'm going to start transitioning over to some consumer market research information before I get into those meaningful messages that I would like to share with you all, because ultimately I just want to create a foundation or lay the groundwork for creating meaningful messages, because there's some really interesting data that can help support the direction that we're going with the Family Meals movement. So when it comes to the current economic environment, inflation is really impacting consumers, especially in relationship to food prices. I'm sure that you have all gone to the grocery store and noticed it yourself. I know that I have. I've changed my own eating behaviors at home because of the way that food prices have been impacted in the past couple of years. And so we can only assume that shoppers are experiencing the same thing. While the 2022 to 2023 inflation was not quite as bad as 2021 to 2022, we are still seeing those food at home costs being increased about 3.5%. And those rising costs have been attributed to things like raising ingredient prices. But even as we see food costs go down a little bit, the overall food at home inflation rates are thought to be impacted by things like increased labor costs and expensive transportation costs. I know the supply chain has been an issue as well. So there are a lot of these things are still impacting the economic landscape of purchases made at the grocery store to support meals at home. And if we combine that and think about the current kind of economic or financial position of Americans, we're starting to see some signs of distress. So as we know, inflation has been a big factor, despite the fact that it's been decreasing over the last couple of years. We are seeing that inverse association between inflation rate and personal savings rate. And we are also seeing a positive association between inflation rate and increasing credit card debt. And so we know that, as these economic impacts are affecting the wallets of consumers, increased prices, it's taking a cut out of discretionary income and really impacting behavior overall. Increasing prices are really tangibly impacting the spending and saving behaviors of consumers. And so we're starting to see that. And of course, we know as dietitians, that's really going to play a role in the foods that families are able to put on the table. And really how they're able to behave at home. I'm going to take a quick pause on prices for just a second, because I also want to shed some light on consumer behavior as it relates to eating meals at home. So I worked with the NCBA's market research team to put together a few slides based off of some of the data we pulled from a tool we have at NCBA called the Consumer Beef Tracker, which is a continuous consumer survey that is conducted to monitor overall U.S. consumer sentiment and attitudes towards beef, as well as some of their behaviors surrounding purchases at retail. So this most recent data was drawn from surveys that were collected between January and June of this year. There are about 3,000 individuals surveyed. Average age was about 42, and just over a third of the respondents belonged to households that included children. We have already heard how more folks are eating meals at home. I've mentioned that already, and we know where those opportunities for education exist. However, we also have to consider and factor in the shopper's wants and needs, and of course their challenges when it comes to meals at home. There's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm going to orient you to the data really quick. But ultimately, this graph is showing us the top considerations that shoppers are taking into, that are factoring into their choices when they're shopping for meals at home. So top 24 considerations, the left-hand side of the screen shows 1 through 12, the right-hand side of the screen shows 13 through 24. That yellow bar indicates that the household includes children, and the teal bar signifies households that did not have children included. So there are a couple really interesting things about this slide and this graph for me. First, we have to look at those top considerations that folks are taking into consideration when they are purchasing food for meals at home. Taste, number one, whether or not the household has children, that's a really important factor, followed by eating experience, value, and safety. Those are the next most important. And when we look at those factors that are a little bit more nutrition oriented, they made the top 24, but they are a little bit less important according to the way that consumers ranked all of these considerations. However, the really interesting part about this for me is that when you look at the yellow bar, those nutrition factors are more important for households that have children. So parents are prioritizing nutrition when it comes to selecting meals to serve to the family. And when you think about it, great taste, value, family favorites, things that kids like to eat. These are all factors that, I mean, we could argue are can be related to nutrition. And these are all factors that I think registered dietitians really can provide some more education and insight on. So thinking that, we don't have to sacrifice nutrition for great taste. And, those meals that kids and families enjoy, we can put creative spins on them to boost nutrition and overall make it a healthier meal pattern. Good value for money. Nutrition and value are so closely related, and I'll get onto that in a little bit here. But I just wanted to call out that those nutrition options that are really obvious about healthy choices, protein, strength. These are all the really obvious ones, but it's not to say that those really important factors don't still have a nutrition angle. I already had this chart, but I wanted to bring this chart back because I think it's really interesting to highlight some of those individual food categories, because as we can see through this chart, not all foods have been affected equally by inflation. As you can see, the meat, poultry, and eggs category is really the only category in which inflation has actually decreased over the past year. And this category of food is a really important one because it tends to be perceived as a more expensive item at the grocery store and something that's a little bit more costly to put into the shopping cart. But these foods are also, they provide the opportunity to pack a lot of nutrients in per serving. And when we look at I guess the kind of rate at which consumers are including these items in their grocery cart on a weekly basis, we're seeing that there are actually a good number of consumers that are including meat and fish and poultry and meat alternatives on a weekly basis. Even those consuming alternative proteins are also including meat, fish, and poultry in their diets as well. And I think that's really important to recognize. And we hear this echoed in consumer sentiment sometimes, that shoppers are really looking for variety and balance as they're planning their weekly meals. Shoppers are looking for both value and versatility in their weekly diet. And so meat and all of the other protein options can be a really easy way to support family meals with high quality protein and essential nutrients. So going back to that value piece, how do we create value in the foods that we're selecting that consumers will bring back home to cook for their family meals? A question we want to ask ourselves is how can education and recommendations drive shoppers to selecting more nutrient-dense foods that pack a lot of value per serving? And beef is one of those foods that I think really does kind of fit the bill. It packs a lot of nutrients for a single serving. Just 3 ounces of cooked beef, about 170 calories per serving, and about 25 grams of high quality protein. It's a complete source of protein, so all the essential amino acids, as well as 10 essential nutrients. I went back and I looked at some of the average costs I chose one of the more economic and really popular cuts of beef, or I guess beef products that consumers are looking for. And I chose lean beef, lean ground beef, that tends to be a shopper favorite. And in 2022, it was about $6.39 per pound. So let's just say that pound of beef provided four servings, probably a little bit more of that, but let's just say 4 servings to keep it even. That's just under $1.60 per serving. And that provides over half the daily value for protein and zinc, B12, as well as those other nutrients listed here on this slide. While shoppers might not see this value, as we know, they're looking at the price tag and they're trying to choose foods that match their budget. I think it's important for us as dietitians to find ways to help them understand the relationship between value and nutrient density and how they're related. How can we select foods that really take us farther, both in nutrition, but then also in the way that we're able to extend them over multiple meals throughout the week? How do we extend leftovers? How can we reduce food waste by choosing foods that are easy to freeze and easy to store long term? So really finding ways to link value and nutrient density, I think, is a really important way for us as dietitians to provide some education points for shoppers. And ultimately, when it comes to beef too, we know that consumers are recognizing some of those unique benefits. They're identifying beef and choosing these options because they're high in protein, or because they're giving them energy to sustain them throughout the day, helping build strength. And we also can see that consumers are trusting that beef is a nutritious source of protein that they can feed their family. So we're seeing some consistency with that sentiment over time. And when it comes to beef specifically, I think there are some misconceptions that consumers may feel not entirely confident in both selecting and preparing beef at home. However, it was interesting when we asked, it was found that a majority of consumers were feeling confident when shopping and cooking beef at home. And even more so, those who have children in the household were reportedly feeling even more confident both purchasing beef cuts and cooking beef at home. I think this makes a little bit of sense, right? When we are thinking about how much culinary IQ has had to increase over the past couple of years, thinking about how many folks were cooking food at home and probably what they were able to learn during that time. So it provides us a tremendous opportunity to really lean into this momentum, empower shoppers' confidence in cooking and selecting beef as part of family meals, and especially those cuts that they feel less confident about, like steaks and roasts, as you can see here on the screen. Like I think about, for example, I think about the opportunity with roasts, thinking about the cut, the cost and the value that they bring. These cuts tend to be a little bit less expensive per pound, and they tend to be larger, which can contribute to leftovers. You know, we can freeze meals, we can make them last a little bit longer. I also think about some of those slower cooking methods that are typically used when preparing these types of cuts. So it gives us the opportunity to provide education around crock-pot cooking, helping shoppers save time and effort when preparing family meals during busy weeks. And I'll get to that in just a moment as we wrap up some of this market research that's been setting the stage for crafting meaningful messages. So after going through some of that market research, we can get a little bit better of an idea, understanding consumers' habits and desires when it comes to shopping for meals at home. We can look at projections too for 2024 to better understand where those opportunities lie for retail dietitians to educate and engage with consumers. So the NPD's Future of Dinner report has been providing some kind of projections as to like what this environment is going to look like in the next year. So what we can anticipate is that inflation is still going to be a major factor in consumer behavior, especially at the grocery store and the foods that they're choosing to bring home to their families. Because we know that the perspective that saving money and increasing value with home meals has really come into clarity during the pandemic. So consumers are going to be eating more dinners at home. It's going to be one way that they can kind of increase the value of the money they're spending on food. We know that in-home dinners are going to remain at a heightened level through 2024, but consumers are busy. Life is kind of returning to some sense of normalcy, and so shoppers are going to be looking for opportunities to introduce convenience to save a little bit of time and effort in the kitchen. Easy meals and pre-prepared dishes are going to be a big thing, especially during the work week. They're going to grow during 2024. They're also going to be turning to retail and retail dietitians to help with meal prep and think about those easy and kind of quick and convenient ideas that can help support their busy lifestyles. And retail ready-to-eat foods are forecasted to grow by double digits in 2024. So that gives us the chance to find ways to kind of mix and match, prepare opportunities to educate consumers about variety, so we can pair those in-home prepared dinners with the retail ready prepared food, to create blended meals where we can balance high quality nutrition with convenience. And so I want to now transition into like thinking about what makes a meaningful message. So we've kind of set the stage, thinking about how we can deliver on the desires, the wants, and the needs, and kind of work through the challenges that consumers are facing. And we're also kind of building off of some of the projections we're seeing for 2024, thinking about where are those opportunities for activation around the family meals movement. But it's also important to deliver, on what consumers are desiring for communications in meaningful ways. So we've heard a lot of these messages relating back to the fact that family meals are important. I think consumers are understanding that this is an important and healthy behavior that they're engaging in. So we have to find ways to consider changing things up a little bit, finding ways that we can communicate that are going to add interest and inspiration so that consumers are kind of able to build off the momentum. So based off the Future of Dinner report and market research that we've kind of gone over, there are a couple directions that we can go to inspire and engage with shoppers. We know that consumer wallets are hurting right now, that value is top of mind with consumers, as is taste and just being able to eat foods that make them feel good and that are reasonable for the family. And so getting nutrition, the most nutrition for their money, is going to be an essential part of the family meals movement and crafting messages relating back to this topic. You know, they're prioritizing taste, they're prioritizing acceptability and value. And so how can we find ways to build around that momentum? Consumers across all ages will also be looking to kind of find break in routine. I know I get this way, but I end up cooking what's easy and that I know well, and consumers are the same way. So how can we find ways to inspire them to go a little bit out of their comfort zone and realize that going out of your comfort zone does not necessarily mean we're going to have to spend more time and money and effort in the kitchen in order to follow healthy dietary patterns. So food manufacturers and retailers can help consumers with dinner prep fatigue, finding new convenient foods and recipes that really meet various skill sets when it comes to that culinary IQ and needs when it comes to providing foods that the whole family is going to enjoy. And really ultimately going back to how we can communicate these tips and tricks in ways that we can help consumers understand the value of these messages, not just in creating family meals that are going to really impact their budget in beneficial ways. They're not going to have to shell out a bunch of money in order to eat healthy, but how can we also help them see the value of the benefits that they're going to be receiving by following these new changes to their lifestyle. I had the chance to chat with Andy Lee Gonzalez. Andy's a retail dietitian of over 7 years, and I really wanted to get her thoughts on what she thinks makes a meaningful message for shoppers. What does she think really hits home, and how can these tips and tricks really help inspire shoppers in the most effective way possible when it comes to activating around the family meals movement? So Andy set the stage for us by highlighting 3 major components of meaningful messages. First, there's a lot of text on the screen, but I'm going to give you the high level here. First, we have to respect cultural relevance and diversity. We know that shoppers are coming from all cultures, all backgrounds, and how important food can be to individuals across the spectrum of life and culture and just preference. So honoring food preference, respecting cultural relevance, and providing culturally relevant recommendations for your shoppers is essential. So it means understanding your demographics well and recognizing that, you know, being creative is great, but how can we be creative, provide reasonable and healthy recommendations while also making sure that it fits well with the lifestyle and background of the shoppers that you're communicating with. Next, she recommended capitalizing on the connection aspect of food. So, I mean, we're all dietitians. We know how important food is for our bodies and our health, but I think we also can recognize what food means to us all. And there is such a positive association that we can create with food. And when it comes to family meals, really capitalizing on that is going to be essential, knowing that that's part of what we're hoping to achieve, really creating an atmosphere that's positive and beneficial for the whole family, starting in planning and creating your shopping list and your meal plan, through the grocery store, through preparation, and through sitting together down at that table and spending time together. So finding opportunities to make it, I guess, relevant or easily to engage for all members of the family, and really capitalizing on that connection aspect is going to be important when crafting these messages. And last, practicality is key. We know that families are busy. We know that their wallets are a little tighter these days. And so doing things and creating messages and providing recommendations that are realistic will help them save time and money and energy. And then are things that they can get excited about, that, you know, we can take away some of the stress and anxiety and lack of confidence when it comes to cooking and preparing meals at home. So I think now at this point, we have talked through the market research and kind of setting the stage for Family Meals Month. We've talked about what makes messages meaningful relating back to the Family Meals movement. And now I want to go into some practical recommendations that maybe you can take to your own practice as a retail dietitian to engage and to inspire around the Family Meals movement. So I'm going to go through 3 meaningful messages and provide a couple recommendations for how you can bring these to life. I hope you find them helpful. So meaningful message number 1, family meals, they're better together. And I really love this concept or this better together messaging because it can really work in so many dimensions. We can provide education on how family meals are spent better together, right? The research on why family meals are important to discuss in the first place. I think that is an opportunity to bring this message to life, to inform consumers and shoppers about the benefits of family meals and why it's important for them to engage in that way. We can also educate consumers on optimizing food pairing. So why are foods better together? And how can we help families lead healthier lifestyles by optimizing on foods we pair? We can also work smarter and work better together with other dietitians, with brands, with leading health organizations to optimize the content we're creating and pack a little bit more punch behind our messages. So what does this look like in practice? It can look a couple different ways. Thinking about those better together family interactions and pushing for family meals, we really want to highlight the ways that families can make cooking and spending time together fun and then practical as well. So you can write a Kids in the Kitchen blog to help parents think of realistic ways that they can include their kids in the food planning and preparation process. I think parents, when I was working one-on-one with families and providing nutrition advice, I loved making this recommendation to get kids into the kitchen to help involve them a little bit more. And the number one concern with parents was that they always thought it was going to be more trouble than it was worth, that it would hinder rather than help. But you can help parents understand the value of that time spent together and the skills that their kids will learn in the process. But they might need a little bit of help and hand-holding when it comes to creating ideas that are age appropriate and are going to make their lives easier ultimately. So that way they're not having to spend a bunch of time in the kitchen babysitting and ultimately adding more time to an already time-intensive process sometimes. So this is a really great way to get kids involved in the process and to help parents really get a better idea of why this is such an important factor of the family meals movement and concept. You can also recommend healthy spins on the classics that kids will love. Nutrition doesn't matter if the kids aren't going to eat it, right? So we want kids to be excited about the foods that are being put on the table. And we know that as dietitians, we can get really creative about little twists that we can make in order to kind of boost the nutrition value of meals. So I'll give a couple ideas for this in just a sec. We can also provide families with just fun and engaging prompts. Maybe they're not used to eating together at the table. They want their kids to be engaged, but they're not really sure of the best way to do it. So you can always recommend conversation starters, things like, what's the worst dad joke? Sorry, best dad joke you ever heard? What are 3 words you would use to describe our family? What's something that made you feel proud recently? My family used to do this growing up. We played a game called Good, Bad, Happy, Sad. And it was we still play it to this day, where we sit down at the table together and we try to think back on our day or our week. We describe something good that happened, something not so good that happened, something bad, something that made us feel really happy and something that made us sad. And it was such I think back to those days and I remember the quality of those conversations. I've also heard the same principle being phrased as something like sharing the rose and the thorn of your day. But ultimately, we know that the food and the nutrition piece of family meals is really important, but we also know that there are benefits that go beyond the food when it comes to sharing family meals together. So finding ways, creative ways that we can really make families excited to spend this time together is going to be really impactful to bring forward that better together messaging. Better Together can also be highlighted by helping consumers see the power of food pairings. So featuring recipes that highlight fun and delicious ways of pairing protein with nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables. You can use MyPlate to provide shoppers an easy framework to follow shopping for and preparing meals. I absolutely love a burger as an example of this concept because I don't think we really appreciate burgers for what they are sometimes. The way that the burger can be a vessel for getting more fruits and veggies in the diet, especially for picky eaters. But we know that burgers are kind of a classic. Kids love burgers, families love burgers. And so I loved this information, just thinking about the dietary guidelines. Scientific report found that burgers and sandwiches were actually a source of key nutrients. So #1 source of protein, calcium, potassium, and fiber. #2 source of whole grain, dairy, and vitamin D. And #3 source of veggies. And we know not every burger is going to look like this. But again, that's where the dietitian can come in to provide recommendations for twists or new options for kind of making burgers a little bit more fun and nutrient dense. So I think that this is one concept that is really a good option for families. And we can really do some good work and being able to drive some of the nutrition components of a burger and center it around the plate for Family Meals Month. And then the last way that this Better Together messaging can work and come forward is we can really highlight the ways that we work better together with each other. I think we can all appreciate the idea that we're stronger in numbers. So retail dietitians can partner with commodity groups like National Cattlemen's or your local state beef council as a fun way of highlighting new recipes, cooking demos, kind of unique ways of providing meal plans and ultimate new meal patterns for consumers. One example of this is Michigan Beef and Michigan Beans came together in a partnership with SpartanNash to highlight the nutritional qualities of beef and beans, provide nutrition recommendations and fun facts for consumers, but then also provided families some easy and nourishing recipes that they could use at home, set them up for success throughout the week, and kind of take away some of the burden of planning by providing them recipes that they could easily incorporate into their weekly routine. You can also partner, highlight foods or meal patterns by partnering with local health organizations, American Heart Association, thinking about heart check foods and heart check recipes, as well as MyPlate to provide shoppers really useful nutrition advice and recipes that can set them up for success. So next, meaningful meal message. We want shoppers to save time and optimize their budget with family favorites. So I've already mentioned it, nutrition doesn't matter if the kids are not going to be eating the foods that are put on the plate. So how can we find ways to make parents' lives easier by saving them time, optimizing their budget, but then also serving meals that the kids will enjoy and will eat, and then they're able to get the nutrition that we're pushing so hard for. As you know, there are many creative ways to help shoppers lead healthier lifestyles, and that we can educate them that they don't really need to give up on their favorites or sacrifice nutrition to make family meals work with their lifestyle. So we can focus on what's achievable, finding easy meal options that can be made possible with things like value-added produce, salad kits, already cut and prepared fruits and vegetables. They tend to be a little bit more expensive, but sometimes parents and families are willing to spend a little bit more to save time. Going back to getting kids in the kitchen, including kids in the kitchen help save time? Maybe not always the case, but especially for those older kids, involving them in the cooking process can really help also save a little bit of time in the kitchen because you've got some extra hands on board. Quick recipes can be made even quicker with pre-prepared side dishes to complement items cooked from scratch. I love this example of a Greek style beef and cheese ravioli recipe. This recipe includes things like canned tomatoes, bagged spinach, bagged raviolis. It's super easy. Throw it all together. It doesn't take much time at all. And sometimes these are items that parents can really just have on hand at any given time. Things that can either be stored dry goods or can be frozen. So this is always a good option, especially for parents who are looking for easy options if they don't have time to go to the grocery store. These are things that they can keep on hand at all time in case they need to save a little time and just throw together something that they already have on hand. But we can provide recommendations for really boosting the nutrition profile of these types of recipes and make them achievable for families. We can also promote convenient meals. Think about the buzzwords that everybody loves to hear: 30 minutes or less, 5 ingredients or less, one dish, one pot. How can we make leftovers and plan ahead so we have meals throughout the week? Meal prep, batch cook. You know, we don't want to have to spend time in the kitchen every single night. So informing and educating around how batch cooking can be a really effective way to kind of make meals last. There's also a lot of opportunity too for informing consumers about expiration dates, how to safely freeze and thaw foods, because I know that keeping things on hand is really going to make life a whole lot easier for families. So there are a lot of opportunities to educate around these types of topics. So one, parents are able to feed the family in a safe way, but two, so that they're not also contributing to more food waste. There are a lot of misconceptions around how expiration dates and freezing and thawing foods can really come into creating healthy meals. And so this is always something that I think consumers are probably could use a little bit more education around, and ultimately can help make their lives easier in the long run. And retail dietitians can walk them through tips and best practices to optimize nutrition and kind of optimize time here. You can also make life easier by sharing 7-day meal plans, things that include healthy recipes that kids will love. You can plan cooking classes that highlight some of the recipes included in these meal plans to help empower families. So whether it's, you know, in-store demos, grocery store tours, or online cooking classes and like walkthroughs, you know, these are really helpful for families because you're helping empower them, showing them ways that they can cook these recipes at home and walking them through it in a way that feels easy and approachable. You can even include age-appropriate roles for kids so they can get involved in the process too. Another activation idea is including some education around cooking technology. So how can kitchen equipment help make families' lives easier? Trying out new recipes for the first time, especially new recipes that include equipment they might not be super familiar with, can be really intimidating. So empowering and educating shoppers to try new recipes, you know, things that require simple ingredients, minimal prep. Take this after work beef pot roast, for example. You can use an Instant Pot, but there are many recipe options where you can use things like slow cookers or crock pots. So families are able to cook while they're out and about, or they're, you know, doing chores around their house, they're helping kids with homework. They're able to just spend time together and not have to focus on cooking. So these are always really good options to save consumers time. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of extra work to show them how to use these tools that will ultimately make their lives a whole lot easier. And last, we can make things simple for them by offering in-store promotions that tell them exactly what they need to make meals at home. It's a great option to help shoppers make really quick decisions when they're in the store, despite the fact that it would be awesome if everybody used a list and stuck to the list 100% of the time. If you're anything like me, you don't always do that. And so whether, you know, you're kind of deviating from the list, or maybe you didn't come to the store with a list at all, these are always good ways to help kind of make life a little bit easier for people, and then ultimately drive them towards eating healthy recipes that they can enjoy with the family. Also a great way to provide little tips and tricks and education pieces, highlighting some of those benefits that family meals are contributing to the American lifestyle. So this is always just a good way to kind of drive certain recipes, but then also provide some education around the family meals movement. And then last, this meaningful meal message, I think an important piece, especially when we're talking about adolescent nutrition, and really like nutrition across the life cycle, is that family meals are helping fill nutrient gaps. I'm bringing back a version of this graph that I showed earlier. Earlier we were talking about diet quality, but this slide really, I want to kind of highlight those nutrients of public health concern across the life cycle. So it does vary from kind of age group to age group. But ultimately, we know that depending on the stage in life, there are, I guess, more significant risks for certain populations when it comes to certain nutrients. And so recognizing that, not all age stage or group of individuals are really equal when it comes to nutrition and their needs, that's an important way that we can communicate with consumers. So thinking that as we're creating retail activation ideas, it can be a really good opportunity to specifically focus on certain populations. For example, adolescent girls and increased iron needs, expecting mothers, thinking about iron, protein, folic acid. There are all these nutrients that we can really help provide some education around. Ultimately, in this education, we can help drive towards healthier meal items that are helping close some of these nutrient gaps and are kind of helping meet nutrition needs in these specific populations, providing a little bit more education as to why these nutrient gaps are existing in the first place and how people can really easily use nutrition and use their diet to kind of help fill some of these gaps. So you can conduct special store tours for specific populations. For example, those planning a pregnancy or those going through pregnancy at free or low cost, ultimately to guide them through some of the basic nutrition principles that they'll want to keep in consideration as they're going through the specific life stage and covering the spectrum of really how certain foods can help fill nutrient gaps in this population. So those are our meaningful meal messages. Whether or not you use these resources to help activate around those ideas or not, totally up to you, but I did want to provide a couple of resources that we offer through Beef is What's for Dinner. Again, I'll provide links to all of these options so you can use them if you like. When it comes to Moments in Time, we have a ton of resources on infant nutrition, adolescent nutrition, as well as nutrition for strength. So have a couple of resources here that you're welcome to use and extend to consumers. We also have a lot of infographics and recipes that are specifically catered to certain populations, helping fill nutrient gaps, and that you can use to really speak to specific audiences. So for example, we have heart healthy recipes on Beef is What's for Dinner that are Heart Check certified by the American Heart Association. So if you are looking for some options to, do any education around heart health, we do have those resources available for you. And then we also have a lot of resources that you can use to hopefully make life a little bit easier for your shoppers. So we have a ton of recipe collections that are specific to 30 minutes or less, family friendly, 5 ingredient or less. So you can use some of these options for consumers if you're looking for quick and easy recipe ideas around specific themes or moments in time to ultimately help drive family meals and healthier eating patterns. And then we also have a lot of resources that you can use to educate around beef cuts, beef quality and grading, as well as beef cookery and culinary tips. So if your consumers are feeling like they're not the most confident in selecting or cooking beef, we have a lot of really simple resources that they can use to really boost their culinary IQ. And then specifically for retail dietitians, we do have a retail dietitian page that you can access at any time. You can scan the QR code here if you'd like to explore that. And then one program that I'm really excited, we'll be launching actually in September, we're really excited to extend to healthcare professionals, including retail dietitians, is a program we're calling the Beef Aficionados. So this is going to be a central hub where we're collecting a lot of resources as well as highlighting and celebrating the dietitian and the healthcare professional that are extending important information about how consumers can really boost the health and nutrition in their lives. And so we'll have a lot of good opportunities to engage with the NCBA beef team, as well as beef nutrition and beef production experts. So if you are interested in learning more about this program once it launches, feel free to scan the QR code. That'll sign you up for our newsletter, and we will be notifying everybody really, really soon about the launch of this program. So if you have any interest, we'd love to have you as Beef Aficionado, and yeah, hope to include you on the team. That's all I've got for you. I know we've got a couple minutes for questions. Again, my name is Riley. If you would like to reach out, my contact information is there on the screen. Happy to answer any questions you have. But thank you so much for your time and for having me today. I guess I'll open it up for questions now.
Yeah, and we have several great ones that came in. And thank you for all of the great resources and tips as we head into Family Meals Month and the Family Meals movement continues. So one that goes back to the earlier part of your presentation. We talked a little bit about the more family meals at home and staying that way since the pandemic. Do you believe that that is more the habit or is it inflation driving that? I mean, you talked about both, but in your opinion?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think when it comes to cooking meals at home, it can be intimidating, especially if you were not doing that previously. So when you didn't really have any other choice, I think there's just a familiarity now. You understand what works for you. You find the routine of it, and it just makes life a little bit easier. But as inflation has been such a influential factor, and like we're really feeling it when we go to the grocery store these days. And I didn't actually include any of this data too, but just thinking about like how inflation has impacted food outside the home. I think if we go back to that slide, I think it was like, let's see if I can go back. Inflation is really even more of a factor when it comes to, here we go, when it comes to food away from home. So if we're seeing 3.6% increase in prices for food at home, it looks like food away from home is at 7.1% increase in the last year. So I think it's probably a little bit of both in my personal opinion. Going out these days is expensive. And so especially for families, a lot of kids in the family, like it can be pricey. So I can imagine there's some habit and some routine that folks got used to during the pandemic, but then impaired with like how expensive it is to eat out these days and how expensive it even is at the grocery store, that they're looking for some more economic ways to feed the family.
Yeah, that's a really interesting added approach. Thank you for coming back to that. Another question. So mealtime, it's great to get kids involved, but oftentimes kids and parents are hungry before they are ready to eat dinner. So do you have any healthy appetizers or ideas to take the edge off hunger while dinner is cooking?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Of course, everybody loves a snack. I love a snack. But we also have a ton of, like I said, we have a ton of resources and recipes on Beef It's What's for Dinner. We do have like a healthy appetizer recipe collection. So I am happy to kind of dig through and provide a couple of like recommendations from those recipe collections if you want to try any of them out. But it really I think appetizers, I always think, oh, it takes so much extra effort, but it really could be as simple as, a little bit of beef jerky and apple slices. It could be, carrots and ranch. Like there are so many ways that you can just kind of help kind of quell the hunger, especially as we know, like when you're hungry, you want to get snacky and then like you ruin your appetite. So kind of having some sort of plan ahead of time when kids are hungry and they're getting ready for dinner, parents are hungry, they're trying to get food on the table. There's always a lot of good options, and Beef It's What's for Dinner has a lot of great resources and recipes that folks can use if they're interested.
Wonderful. One more question for you. So on the slide that you kind of came back to where you added in the nutrients, you gave two different approaches, but you talked about ages 9 to 13 and then 14 to 18. Two areas where the public health has the biggest concern for nutrient gaps. What does your research show from a consumer insight perspective? How do you reach that population best? Is it through parents? What social platforms? Like, how do we reach that group? Knowing that, again, their parents are likely the ones, or their caregivers are the ones that are giving them the food that they're eating, but they also are making their own decisions at that point too.
Right. I would love to come back to that question from our market research and supply chain side to provide insights on that, because from that perspective, I don't necessarily have the expertise there. But what I can tell you from my own perspective and my own expertise, knowing that this age group is active on social media, I think that is a really key influential factor in the food decisions and the information that this age group is receiving. And I know that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I don't think it's necessarily the only option to communicate with this audience. Of course, parents are going to be our like primary like kind of conduit into communicating with this age group, but also knowing that they're going to social media and engaging on social media platforms to get health and nutrition advice. It's really finding opportunities to communicate in responsible ways. You can't prevent them from seeing misinformation, but you can correct misinformation, and you can provide useful tips and tricks specifically for this age group, or you can, if that's maybe not your wheelhouse, work with registered dietitians who are providing information and recommendations to this kind of adolescent age group, and sharing those resources with the families you're chatting with, sharing it on social media if you are present on social media. But ultimately, I think the big factor here is like correcting the misinformation, because there's just a lot of stuff out there on social media these days, and it's really hard to control what they're able to see. So finding opportunities to correct misinformation when we can.
Love that. Well, thank you for all of your insights, following up with our questions, and just everything that you've provided over the last hour for us. So if anybody's looking for additional insights and links, we are sending that out after, along with the certificate of attendance and the slide deck. They also have a wonderful sponsor resource page on RDBA's website as well, so you can check for things there, and then watch for an email from me, Stephanie Schultz, in your inbox with your certificate of attendance and CPEU information. So thank you everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.